Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. In this video, I'm going to be introducing a new risk indicator for ALGO, Algorand. This is based on the upside downside potential indicator that we developed here on the channel. And the idea is to give you a sense of where ALGO is right now and whether it's a good time to be holding ALGO, help you make your own decisions about that. So what you see here on the screen is the price of Algorand color-coded by risk. So let me break that down for you. On the y-axis, which is vertical, we have the price of Algorand plotted, and each dot represents one day, and the colors reflect the risk level on that day. And so if you look over at the right, you see this UDPI measure, and up on top, we have 5, which is color-coded deep red, and on the bottom, we have -5, which is color-coded green, and those correspond to days on this price chart. And so what you see is that there are times when the price of Algorand is looking green, which means that it's relatively undervalued from the perspective of the model. Or to put it differently, there's more upside potential by a lot than downside potential at that point in time. So an example of that is, back here in late 2020, before this massive run up into the early part of 2021, and then again, in the summer of 2021, we saw that the price of Algorand had pulled back and was flashing green, meaning a lot of upside potential and limited downside potential. That downside potential in the summer, when we're seeing all this green, had been tapped out. And what's useful about that is that if you were around during the summer and prices were going down and people were fearful and people were predicting pretty dramatic things like a $20,000 or even a $10,000 Bitcoin, which would have been a massive drop following a massive drop, and that would have taken down alts with it. But with this indicator, looking at this chart, we can say with some confidence that that wasn't a very plausible thing to be expecting at that point. The downside had pretty much been exhausted, and there was a lot more upside potential than downside potential at that point. And you can see that on the chart. And so in that way, the UDPI here did a very good job in calling that bottom. It's also done a very good job historically in calling tops. And you can see that each time the model flashes deep red, it tends to precede a retracement. The price comes back down, or it at least consolidates for a while, allowing the risk to reset a bit. And so it's advantageous to have this because when it starts flashing red, you can make a decision that perhaps you should exit the market. Perhaps you should take some profits off the table. By contrast, when it's flashing deep green, you can say that's a very good time to enter, and maybe you should be thinking about accumulating then. So another way you might want to look at this is just by looking at the raw output of this model, this UDPI model, as an oscillator here. So we now have on the y-axis, vertically, we have the UDPI, and each line represents 1 point. And so the UDPI goes from +5 to -5, and so we see that plotted out here on the chart. And what we can see is that we have this kind of oscillating motion, right? And where we are right now is that we've pulled down on the risk indicator to a bit below -1, which means that there's more upside potential than downside potential. It means that some of the downside potential has already been played out, right? And we can see that we've been in this pretty steep downtrend for a couple of months now. We almost peaked at 5, almost maxed out the scale, and have been retracing ever since. What we don't see is any sign of a reversal. And so it's possible that Algorand is not ready to reverse and make another move to the upside yet. Don't know for sure, but there's nothing on this chart that says that that's ready to happen. If we want to just look at this output here, you can see that we're sitting at -1.18, well below the midpoint, more upside potential than downside potential. Favorable risk to reward ratio, relatively speaking. Not the most favorable it could ever be. That would be -5, but relatively favorable, right? Now, it might be helpful to look at the Algorand price chart to get a little bit more acquainted with what we're seeing here and just mapping on that risk information to the price chart itself. So looking over here at Algorand's price, we can see that sitting at $1.82, consolidating a bit since the end of this pretty spectacular move that started on the 21st of July and ended up taking the Algorand price up 277%, nearly a 4x, not too shabby. And that peaked out around, the 9th or the, 12th of September. And it's been in this sideways motion ever since. And so when it peaked out here at around 250, that's when we saw that the UDPI was flashing a very high degree of risk. That would have been suggesting to take some risk off the table, meaning to reduce your position, maybe take some profits and sell some. And had you done that in this region up here, that would have served you very well, because then the price retraced quite a bit down to 150 here, and it's now sitting at 182. Okay, so that's the story with where Algorand is right now. The other thing, though, that we want to see is not just how's Algorand looking against the US dollar. We would also like to see whether choosing Algorand over other options is the way to go, or whether, even if you want to get into the market, maybe you do want some exposure to crypto market right now, perhaps, not financial advice, but perhaps you do. And, the market looks pretty bullish, so you'd be in good company. And I know I could certainly understand where you'd be coming from there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Algorand is the first choice that you'd want to make. And so to get a sense of that, we want to look at this against other assets, in particular, the leading quote unquote altcoin, the leading non-Bitcoin asset, which is Ethereum. So we're also going to look at the UDPI, what it says about Algorand versus Ethereum. And what this tells you is, am I better off holding Algorand, or am I better off holding Ethereum in the coming period? So here is the UDPI risk indicator for Algorand against Ethereum. And so we have the price of Algorand denominated in Ethereum on the y-axis, this vertical axis. And we see that it's been in a downtrend for as long as the price history has been in existence, right? Ethereum has largely outperformed Algorand to this point. But we can also see that this is, moved around quite a bit. There are times on this chart where you saw some green flashing, and green again means very high upside potential and limited downside potential. So if you look over here on the left-hand side of the chart, you see that that was a good time to be accumulating Algorand rather than Ethereum. Then there was this move to the upside, started flashing red again, and then it would have been advantageous to swap your Algorand for Ethereum. Ethereum would have been a better hold at that point. And there's more red and orange on this chart than there is green. It does not look like there have been many times when you would have been better off holding Algorand than Ethereum. That is the cold hard truth of this chart. But what about right now? Well, right now we can see that we're sitting right around the midpoint. If we look all the way over at this far right-hand side, we see that we're kind of orangish yellow. We've just come out of this deep red move where Algorand had to chill out a bit after moving too quickly against Ethereum to sustain it. We can look at this again as this output, and we can see that, confirming what we just looked at on the previous chart, Algorand has spent most of his time in the orange and red territory on this chart, which means that generally speaking, it hasn't been a very good risk reward ratio to buy Algorand instead of Ethereum. And we're still moving down right now, which means that risk is reducing. It's becoming more favorable relatively, but it's still right about at the midpoint, just below zero there, and still in a downtrend. That's the really important thing to understand, is that we don't have any sign of a reversal yet. And so it seems quite possible that we're going to continue to move downwards. And we can see that, in the recent past, the ALGO against ETH UDPI has read, almost a 3 here. And so we don't know if we're going to get that low, but it would be premature to say that, now's the time to flip your Ethereum for Algorand, or now's the time to prefer Algorand to Ethereum if you're coming in with fresh fiat US dollars. It still looks like Ethereum is probably the better play at this point. Again, not financial advice, but that's how it looks. And we can drive home that point by taking one last look at the charts here, the price charts. And what I'm going to pull up is the ALGO to Ethereum ratio. So instead of looking at ALGO in dollars, we're going to look at ALGO denominated in Ethereum, which is simply the price chart. And so that move that we looked at against the dollar, where we saw that Algorand pumped almost 4x, 277%. Well, that move against Ethereum was even more impressive. It outpaced Ethereum, even as Ethereum was recovering a bit during that time also. ALGO put in 353%, a 4.5x in a short period of time. And what's happening now? Well, since then, the valuation of Algorand against Ethereum has been in a downtrend pretty clearly since it finished out this move and topped out here on the 7th of September, right over here at about 0.03 Ethereum. And the price looks pretty crappy. I mean, if you look at the direction that it's headed, we're in a clear downtrend, and it's not looking particularly bullish for Algorand against Ethereum. So, sorry to break it to you, but if you're making a decision right now between these two assets, it is looking more favorable for Ethereum than it is for Algorand. So if you guys find this valuable, subscribe to the channel, give us a like, help us reach more people, turn on your notifications, and lastly, follow us on Twitter, where we give regular updates about UDPI risk indicators for this and many other assets, growing number. That's Upside Down Data at Twitter. We look forward to seeing you next time.